Shalom, everyone. It's Nathaniel. Welcome to our Bible study as we move into the year 2022. We are going to be looking at this thematically, and basically the theme for the year is repairing the breach, rise up and build. So we're going to be talking about that, and as always, we start with 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. Which tells us that we should study to show ourselves approved unto the Most High, workmen who need not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth, as well as 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16, that tells us that all scripture is God-breathed and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the person of the Most High may be complete, thoroughly furnished unto every good work. We also know that none of this can happen without prayer, so we are to pray without ceasing. And in our study, we are to approach the study as a little child would approach being taught, which is to be receptive and have an open heart to what the Spirit wants us to know and do. And what is going to be revealed is that he expects us to go back and fetch what the ancient ones knew and what they taught. So as we move into the lesson for this quarter, that's what we have in mind, and that's our desire as we seek the Father's blessing on his word. So we're going to be starting with the idea of repairing the breach, rise up and build the spiritual house. And that is going to be our theme, not for 2020, and I will make that correction, but for 2022. In our study, it's going to be more of a reflection than an actual study. We're going to be reflecting on that idea of repairing the breach, rise up and build the spiritual house, and we're going to be looking at it from a perspective of our personal relationship with the Most High, our relationship with our families, our communities, and how all of that will play itself out in the nation that the Most High has established for his people. So as we get started, we're going to be looking at repairing the breach. A breach is in relationship to a hedge of protection. And a hedge of protection is usually used when a vineyard has been made, and in order to keep animals out and from destroying the crop in the vineyard, a hedge is placed around it. We're going to talk a little bit about what that hedge is. The breach is when the hedge is burst over or burst through. Basically, a hedge is a wall. And so the idea of a breach is when a wall has been compromised. And that's therefore the breach is actually the bursting forth, and it has to do with breaking a wall down. The actual word for hedge is a feminine noun, and it's called the Hebrew word is masuka or mesuka, and it means, it's a feminine word, and it means a hedge which is made of briars and thorns. So basically it's a plant, which is why the graphic over here is listed, because that's kind of what a hedge is. Now this is a hedge on top of a concrete wall, but basically a hedge is that which is surrounding a garden, basically, or a vineyard. And it comes from a verb, which is the primitive root, which means to hedge up or to entwine or to shut in, and primarily for the purposes of protecting that which is inside, keeping that which isn't supposed to be on the inside on the outside. So the hedge is there to protect the vineyard. The vineyard is there to produce, in our study, the fruit that the Most High has planted. If you remember back in Genesis chapter 2 and chapter 3, the Most High planted a garden east of Eden, and there he put the man, but he also had everything that the man and the woman needed for life. And that's why the tree of life was in there. Well, most likely that garden was a vineyard as well. And so that is the analogy, that's the visual picture that those who are reading from the culture that these words came out of, they understood that concept. So the vineyard is there to produce the fruit of the Most High, and that fruit actually sustains the life of those who are inside the vineyard and refreshes the life as well. So the gaps are, again, that which has breached the hedge of protection around the vineyard, and that's what our study is about. How do you rebuild that breach? How do you repair that breach, rather? Now, we're going to be looking at some scriptures that talk about that, but just to give you the background for the scriptures that we're going to be reading, the children of Israel were first overrun by the Assyrians, and that included the 10 northern tribes. The tribes in the south were called Judah, and that's where Jerusalem and the land of Judea were. They actually were overrun by the Babylonians. Jeremiah talked about that. Well, there were lots of prophets that talked about the coming destruction of Jerusalem and Judea. And the reason why they were going to be destroyed was because they were operating outside of the will of the Most High. They were worshiping other gods. They were taking advantage of people, all of the unrighteous things that were being done. And so Jeremiah was told, your people are going into captivity. They're going to be there for 70 years. Get used to it. Go ahead and do what you need to do to sustain yourself until that period of captivity is over. Once the period of captivity was over, they were actually underneath the jurisdiction of another king, King Cyrus, who was a Persian. And the Persians had taken Babylonian territory and were now in charge of all of that area. So it was this Persian king that asked if anyone from Judea or from Judah wanted to go back and build the temple again, because the Most High had told him that needed to be done. Now, this was a heathen king, but we're going to come back to that as we look at the scriptures. And so a man named Nehemiah comes along and says he has this burden to do exactly that. So he is empowered to go back, but he doesn't go back by himself. He goes back with a bunch of committed individuals who are willing to carry out this vision of rebuilding the temple. And in order to rebuild the temple, you have to build the hedge of protection that's around the temple. And so the first thing that they were to do was to repair the breach or the gap that was in the wall that was surrounding the temple and protecting the temple. Although the temple had already been destroyed, it wouldn't make sense to have a temple rebuilt without protection around it. So their first job was to work on the outside and then work their way back in. The people that he used to do that were warriors. They were unafraid. They knew they were going into hostile territory, and they didn't let that reality sway them from doing what Nehemiah needed to have done. When they went back, though, they didn't go back alone. Even as this group, and they started working, they worked in pairs at least. So there's this concept that when you're doing the will of the Most High, in many cases, he wants you working in concert with other people. In their case, one would build while another stood by ready to attack whoever would try to stop that from happening. So they were there to fight. So one was there to fight, one was there to build. And it was that combination that allowed that wall to be, or that breach in the wall, or those breaches actually in the wall to be repaired. So the idea is that we don't work alone. All right. So that's the theme for 2022, repairing the breach. It's going to be looked at personally, as a part of our families, as a part of a community, and a part of the nation. And we're going to look at who this hedge is. All right. So that's going to lead us into Genesis chapter 2, 1 Corinthians 15, Isaiah chapter 4, Ezekiel chapters 13 and 22, Ezra chapter 1, and then Matthew. So we're going to look at those scriptures, and let me begin with those. Okay, so we'll start with 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Now, we're starting here. Actually, let's not start there. I'm going to leave that on the screen, but I'm going to start in Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2, starting at verse 14, says, "And Yahuwah Elohim took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it." Don't forget, the vineyard is a garden, and so most likely the Garden of Eden was also a vineyard, and it was one that the Most High planted. Okay, so it was in that garden that the man was placed, and he was told to dress it and to keep it. Dressing and keeping has to do with more than just making sure everything looks nice. It also had to do with the idea of protecting what was inside of the garden, because not only was the tree of life there, but they were there. The man and the woman were there as well. And so the man's job was to dress the garden, but he was also to keep the garden, and that meant taking care of it. So when the woman was tempted by the serpent and actually deceived by the serpent and ate the fruit that the man had been told not to eat, then the man was held responsible. And that's where we get in. So that's the backdrop for 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 45. And it says, "And so it is written, the first man, Adam, was made a living soul." And that living soul was placed in the garden. The last Adam was made a life-giving or a quickening spirit. Okay, howbeit that was not first which is spiritual, but that which is natural, and afterward that which is spiritual. So the first Adam, as a living soul, was the one in charge of dressing and keeping the garden. So in a very real sense, he was the hedge. That's where I'm going with that scripture. Okay, so keeping that in mind, that he was to be the hedge of protection, and he did not do his job. And as a result of that, the whole garden became at risk to the point where they had to be kicked out of it, because the other thing that was in the garden was the tree of life. Before sin happened, there were no angels in the garden guarding that tree. He who was responsible for the garden, that was part of his responsibility. Okay, and so once he was kicked out, then the Most High sent angels to guard the way to the tree of life, and that's where the flaming sword came in. So that which the Most High had planted would always remain as he intended. Okay, so see this, there's this larger narrative that's going on, and that's why we're looking at this, and that's why it's going to take an entire year to do it, because that was what the first Adam did was so catastrophic that a second Adam had to come to undo it. And that's who Yeshua is. And that's why it says the last Adam was made a quickening spirit. Okay, so let's go to the next verse now. And okay, where am I? Okay. You have got to be kidding. Okay. All right. Sorry. Just so you know, this is the third time I have tried to do this lesson. And each time something has happened. So it's obvious that the Most High wants the lesson done, and that which is against the Most High does not. Okay. Isaiah chapter 4. Okay, we're going to go to Isaiah chapter 4 is not the one. No, it isn't. So we're not going to go there. Let's go to Ezekiel chapter 13. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, let's just go ahead and go right to the point in this particular meditation. Ezekiel chapter 13, verse 1. And the word of Yahuwah came to me, saying, Son of man, prophesy against the prophets of Israel that prophesy, and say unto them that prophesy out of their own hearts, hear the word of Yahuwah. Thus says Yahuwah Almighty, woe unto the foolish prophets that follow their own spirit and have seen nothing. O Israel, your prophets are like the foxes in the deserts. You have not gone into the gaps, neither made up the hedge for the house of Israel to stand in the battle in the day of Yahuwah. They have seen vanity and lying divination, saying Yahuwah says, and Yahuwah has not sent them. And they have made others to hope that they would confirm the word. Okay, this is obviously talking about the prophets, and it's talking about false prophets in the time of Ezekiel, when the Babylonians were about to destroy Jerusalem for the final time and to send the people into captivity. And he's telling those who are in positions of leadership, you are leading wrongly. You're leading the people wrongly. And that's what this is talking about. You're prophesying things that aren't true. You're prophesying out of your own hearts. You're saying that you're following the spirit, and you're following not the spirit, you're following your own spirit, and you haven't seen anything. And so those prophets of Israel, when right before the nation was destroyed, are comparable to what's going on today. Those who are in positions, so let me speak very plainly and directly. This prophecy is to leadership. This is the leaders. These are the people that were supposed to, by the blessing of the Most High, be in charge of the souls of the people that the Most High had them ministering to. And they were using those people for their own desires, their own devices, their own lust. And they were harming the people. They were in positions of leadership, and they were harming the people. And so that's why, and then telling the people that the Most High was telling them whatever was coming out of the mouths of those prophets, and what was coming out of their mouths was not of him. All right. So that's what this is all about. So that it was that way then, and pointedly it's that way now. The Most High's people are not being served, and that's why the things that are going on in the culture are happening right now. We blame politicians, we blame uh, people with avarice and greed, and all that may be true. But the bottom line is that those who are in charge of the Most High's people, because the Most High's people are supposed to be the light of the world, those who are in charge of the Most High's people have not done what they're supposed to be doing. Therefore, the ministry of reconciliation is not going on, and that which has come against the vineyard has now broken down the walls, just as it happened in Ezekiel's day. So that's what we're going through even as we speak. And that's what the Most High wants his people to understand. So now we're going to look at another verse. Let's look at Ezekiel. All right. Yeah, I have to do it this way. We're going to look at one other verse in Ezekiel. Starting at Ezekiel chapter 22, verse 1. Moreover, the word of Yahuwah came to me, saying, now this is Ezekiel. Okay. Now, son of man, will you judge? Will you judge the bloody city? Yes, you shall show her all her abominations. Then say, thus says Yahuwah the Almighty, the city sheds blood in the midst of it, that her time may come and make idols against herself to defile herself. You are become guilty of your blood that you have shed, and have defiled yourself in your idols, which you have made, and you have caused your days to draw near, and are come even unto your years. Therefore have I made you a reproach unto the heathen, and a mocking to all countries. Those that be near and those that be far from you shall mock you, which are infamous and much vexed. This is the attitude that the world has about God's people. We are being mocked. And the reason why we're being mocked successfully is because of what has been happening inside the camp of the Most High. And what has been happening has to do with sin, worshiping other gods, shedding innocent blood. That is all part and parcel of the state of Israel when Ezekiel is writing those things. These people were shedding innocent blood, and it was happening in the streets. Chaos was in the streets, just as it is today. Okay, don't forget, this nation calls itself a Christian nation. And the things that are happening in this, there are more guns here than any other place on the planet. And it's not the guns themselves, it's the heart of the people with them. And it's manifesting in the way of a lawless society. We keep blaming heathens for it, when in actuality, if the church is really the church, these things would not be happening. Okay. And so those who are a part of the society, but not a part of God's people, are seeing all of these things, and they mock us. They mock us because there is no power, which is one of the reasons why the Most High shut things down over a year ago, because he is moving his people into a place of repentance, and all of that business as usual had to cease, so that we could get back to what he has originally intended for us to be. But I digress. Now, We're going to continue. It says, behold, the princes of Israel, everyone were in thee to their power to shed blood. This goes back again to who is responsible for these things. Israel as a whole is responsible, but those in positions of leadership in the nation are the ones responsible and the ones facilitating this lawlessness, this shedding of blood, this treating the souls of men as if they are nothing, and this avarice and greed that runs all aspects of this society. It was happening then, which is why they were destroyed. It's happening now, which is why destruction is on the horizon. In you, verse 7, have they set light by father and mother in the midst. They have dealt by oppression with the stranger. In you have they vexed the fatherless and the widow. You have despised my holy things, have profaned my Sabbaths. Now it's talking directly to the ministers, those who are in positions of leadership, those who are in charge of the seminaries. All of those people are culpable, not by what some human being says, but by what the scriptures have said. So when Ezekiel is speaking these things, he's not speaking these things to the average person on the street. He's speaking these things to the people who should know better and should be doing better. And in verse 9, 22 verse 9, and you are men that carry tales to shed blood, and in you they eat upon the mountains. In the midst of you they commit lewdness. In you they discover their father's nakedness. In you they have humbled her that was set apart for pollution. And one has committed abomination with his neighbor's wife. Another has lewdly defiled his daughter-in-law. Another in you has humbled his sister, his father's daughter. And it just goes on and on and on. Okay. Let me see if there's anything else here.